Good morning and welcome to the Friday, August 21st meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust Working Group. I'm Alan Edinburgh, leader of this working group. I'd like to call the meeting to order. This meeting is being held remote pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust Working Group will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement can be found on the Town of Westboro's website at town.westboro.ma.us. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so in the following manner: on Westboro TV, that is Charter 192 or FiOS Channel 28. The recording will also be placed on demand by Westboro TV. No additional in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the town website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. I will note that we have got some members of the community who are helping us liaison with other committees and organizations and are volunteering to help the work of the working group, and they are in attendance today as well. And so thank you for joining us. So the first item on the agenda is, let me actually walk through the agenda here. I'll put that up for everyone to see. Okay, so the first item on the agenda this morning will be a discussion vote for the approval of the minutes from our last meeting last Friday, August 14th, 2020. We'll then talk about community engagement, particularly looking at the Co-Urbanize site. We'll move into governance and discussion review. I know that with Hank not here this morning, we may delay this until next week and have next week's meeting focus on that, which is fine. We're actually going to review draft 4 of the analysis, recommendations, and action items report that Ed has been coordinating. We'll then open up for, we have a couple of other items of other business, next steps and action items that we'll discuss, and then we'll adjourn. And so I appreciate the committee and the working group, adding this additional meeting as we look to keep things moving forward in preparation for special fall town meeting. I've got some updates on that as well. So that said, let's head into the first item on the agenda, which is the approval of minutes from August 14th, 2020. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I so move. Ed.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion or notes or changes that need to be made to the minutes? I heard you, Stevie, seconded.
Yeah, I did. It's funny, the screen that I have is all you guys but not me, so I don't know what I'm doing. And yes, I did.
I think you're in a small box in the upper right corner. Does anyone have any comments or changes to the minutes, clarifications?
No.
Okay, no. With no comments, go to a roll call vote. Steve?
Brett, yes.
Ed Bain?
Bain, yes.
Amy?
Yes.
And Edinburgh, yes. Okay, so it passes 4-0-0, 4 being present. Okay, so next thing I want to get into this morning is on the community side. And before I go to Amy for an update on where that team is and things, I thought it would be good to give folks an update on Co-Urbanize. There have been a couple of meetings with the team from Co-Urbanize and the sponsors at the Massachusetts Housing Partnership. At this point, they are funding this site through the end of November, which would certainly get us through special fall town meeting, even if it's delayed and a little beyond. And they are willing to consider extending that sponsorship beyond that if we have a need to keep it up for this purpose beyond that. Although, again, this is something that once formed, the trust may elect to continue, using or something like it. So with that, we have started putting in content, and just a brief comment about the process that Co-Urbanize recommends. So they recommend getting a site, as much information as possible together, and doing what they call a soft lunch, a soft launch. You can tell I haven't had breakfast yet and I've had my coffee. And in doing the soft launch, what we effectively do is the site's not generally visible to the public, but there's a special preview link that we can share with individuals who can then go in, see the site, use it as if it were public. And the goal is to get folks in our community who are interested in affordable housing, who may be seen as influencers, to take a look at the site and go through our feedback questions and provide answers. And after a short period of time of that, we then announce it, make it available to the public. That way, when people start going to the site for the first time, there are already questions, there are answers, there's interaction. It actually encourages people to comment. No one wants to be the first person to comment or to answer a question. And so, if we have 10 or 15 people who've gone through and provided comments and questions, the general public will feel more comfortable and get that into place. So we'll talk about that in a few moments, but what I thought I would do right now, and I'll share that link with everyone today, but I'm going to pull up the site and go through a little bit of the demo of what we have so far. Okay. Can everyone see this okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is what the homepage looks like. At this point in time, I've been asked to try and find pictures that aren't as blurry. Mm-hmm. I actually pulled this graphic off the Master Planning Advisory Committee's website. Is a nice holding place. The structure of the site and the way it works is it's built in modules, and the modules let you do certain things. So there are certain restrictions on formatting and the way things look and feel. So it's not like building a website from scratch. So on the one hand, it's a little limiting. On the other hand, it makes it very easy to add content and update and manage it, which I think is certainly our priority. So when people land, they'll be on the info page. If they scroll down, we've put in text about who we are as a committee, about housing trusts in general, some tiles about public benefits and why we think this is a good thing to do for the community. This site is generally used for specific development projects. So there's a location widget. So right now it's just pointing to Town Hall. But we'll, should we ever be working on a project, we can put the location of that project in and let people know about it. And then there's an index of documents and information and plans and things that we want. So part of this homepage and the landing page is the ability to click through. So our goal in this and building community support is not only getting community input and feedback, but doing some education so people understand, what affordable housing is, debunk some of the myths about it, what is a trust, how does it fit in. And so we are adding, and it's in process right now, a frequently asked questions page, which will show up in the top next to housing affordability. But we also wanted to put some of those questions and answers. I made graphics from prior presentations that people can click through and do a little bit of learning here. And so we'll have a few more that we'll put into this to get some of the basics down so people feel comfortable moving through. The next component of the site are updates. Right now, we only have the one update, which is our welcome update. Hold on one second here. Okay, and which is an introduction to who we are, what we're doing, and in the site. The goal here is when people subscribe to get updates. Every time we post an update, they're notified by email or optionally by text, and it'll be a way to get messaging out. And so the plan will be that once we go live to do an update about where we are in the process. We can do an update that's educational in nature. We can do an update that says, hey, we've added new questions. We're looking for feedback on these topics. Please come back to the site and answer these new questions, and try and keep it dynamic. The goal is to get people to engage, to both learn and provide feedback. The next component of the site is the timeline. So as we accomplish things or schedule things out into the future, we'll add them to the timeline so that we know and people can get a sense of how we're moving and how fast we're moving. This is another location where I will provide, or we can provide, links to the recordings of our meetings, as well as updated minutes and documents. I know we hadn't approved the minutes, so these are draft minutes. I'll actually go in and refresh that document so that it says it's the approved minutes once I get those submitted to the town clerk. And so as we look at the project and the timeline, once we know, have a sense of when special fall town meeting is going to be scheduled, we'll add that as sort of as our end goal at the top of the timeline, and people can see where we're going. We'll put community input as a box and outline the schedule that'll be available for the public. I'm going to skip over feedback for a second and go to housing affordability. This is the team at Co-Urbanize is going to make the graphs easier to read and update some of the formatting here. But this is sort of, and this is content that's coming out of our document as well. This is sort of the story arc about housing affordability. What is affordability? It's at 30% threshold per HUD. What does that look like in Westboro? What's severe burden? What does that look like for renters and owners? Then we can look at how affordable our housing is, and we've got by monthly housing cost for renters and owners, what percentage of housing in town falls into each band, and then looking at affordability for owners, which is how much they're paying, looking at versus household cost. And then we can look at the cost burden for Westboro in comparison with our data dashboard communities and show that, effectively our renters were a little bit above, we're slightly above the average. For ownership, we're below the average. We're not overall in bad shape, but we're certainly not in, what I would say great shape. But there's a lot, so there's definitely opportunity, there's definitely need there. And so this will help establish the need for why we're looking at housing affordability and affordable housing in specific. The feedback tab in pages is where we sort of get to the heart of it. The experts at Co-Urbanize recommends having 5 questions at a time available. We can answer, basically go in. We've got an initial set of 5 questions. We're still editing those. Leah's working with me on this. We're working on additional questions that will fold in, which we can add later. We'll come up with other questions based on feedback or questions we get from the public. But it's, what attracts you to live or work here, the types of businesses you frequent. This is important to get a sense of the community and the culture, and it really goes into workforce housing. What are our most important housing needs? An open-ended question. How do you think improving housing affordability will benefit our community? And, what else do you want us to know? Is any other things? And this will draw out other topics that we should ask questions about, other issues we might want to discuss or consider as we work through our presentation, be ready to answer questions at town meeting. So any questions or anything people want me to show a little bit more on this?
That looks great.
Thank you.
It looks like we're able to pull pieces from the document. They'll feed back and forth between what we've been putting together and some of the pieces here, which is good because that way we have a consistency in our numbers and charts and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I really
you.
appreciate
Any
the
other-
comment you made, Alan, which was the fact that, at least in the present document, many of those figures are really unreadable, particularly the text and the numbers. There's a blue series of two charts that were, impressive in the sense of what they presented, but you could not read the information on the margin. It's the next set,
Yeah.
I think, beyond this.
We definitely
Yeah.
need to upgrade those some
Yeah,
of those
so-
to make them readable.
So this is a slightly atypical page. So the team at Co-Urbanize is formatting it. Our project liaison put this up for us. The web tech will be in there today to adjust the layout of this page and make sure the graphs are all readable. And so the graphs will become larger. They might go side to side rather than just one on top of the other. But they know that it's too small right now to read. They'll have to make those larger.
Steve, were you?
Yeah, and I don't see any problem with adding a page. In other words, each one of these things were side by side on a single page in the text that we had, and obviously it conveys the info. But to the extent that we really want people to look at these things, I wouldn't have a problem with putting each one of our figures on a page so it's big enough to read. And of course we can't really read it even on the screen. But if you look at the numbers at the bottom of the page, even when you blow it up, they're very difficult to read. So that was my point, and I'm glad to hear that they're going to work on it. They are
we should.
truly readable in our.
I think that also carries over a little bit into the document as well. There were some that, particularly charts like this, Steve, that I think we need to work on to once again make them a little bit more readable. Even if we have to it's easy enough to regenerate them.
Yeah, no, that's good. And, all the stuff you've got in there is really good and informative for the purpose. And therefore, without the efforts, I guess, to make it readable to John Q, who may pick this thing up later, it would be unfortunate because the information is really good.
Okay, so what I'll do next.
It's good to know that Massachusetts is supporting us.
Okay. Amy, did you have any feedback or questions?
Yeah, I just had one question. So let's say that somebody had a general question. Is there a place that they can click? Where does that information go? Who is going to be responsible for kind of fielding those questions that may not be answered? Or is there not an option for somebody to, click and get more information?
So, when people, several of us have, been signed up. Myself, Leah, Steve, have signed up to be administrators of the site, which means we can go in and make edits.
Yeah.
And Steve, whenever you're ready, I'm happy to provide that training. We'll get email notification when people post comments.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then we can go into the system and provide answers or acknowledge those comments. It'll go to a number of folks, and we can coordinate that. In the site, if we can have links, it's a good idea. We could probably add a link to a generic email address if people want to send us an email.
Mm-hmm.
But we also have, maybe we need to change the order. What was that, Steve?
I was just saying, however this gets done, most of the time I do a lot of work off hours, and having comments sent to me makes it possible for me to be efficient later on in the day. One of the things that I'm finding when we pick this particular time of day on a Friday, I figured it wouldn't be a problem at all. But as others have found, it turns out that Friday mornings everybody wants to get the work done, and so they can leave and go on vacation. But anyway, yeah, it'll all work out, and at some other time of day, Alan, I'd be happy to work with you and figure out how we get that done.
Okay, excellent. We can schedule time. And so there is the ability, that's one of the reasons we have the open-ended question where it's any comment and things of that nature. And as you sort of hit the main part of the website, you get in, and once subscribed, there's the subscribe button becomes a comment button.
Alan, will it be, so if somebody poses a question, will it be public, or will it just privately come to, like it said, email or whatever?
So the questions as they're currently set up are public. So
I'm sorry. I need to clarify. So if somebody asks, Joe Schmo asks a question, is that going to be a public question that everybody can see, or no?
Yes. So right now, the way these feedback questions are set up is whatever people fill in the box, the comment box, will show up in the comments below. We can make them private.
Okay.
And so if we think that we want one question, if we want this general question, talk to us, what else is a valuable community member, you want us to know, we could certainly make this question private, and it will say your comments will not be posted below.
Okay.
So people will know. I don't know, do people think that's appropriate? Are we concerned that people might not comment if it's public?
I'm not sure. What I'm trying to avoid, in my mind anyway, is if somebody posts something that it becomes a forum for disagreement.
Okay, so part of what also happens with this comment mechanism is these comments are also moderated by Co-Urbanize.
Okay.
So they do a couple of things. One, when a comment's made, they validate that the identity of the person making the comment is real, right?
That is
and that it's, so no bots and people relevant to the project. If someone from Idaho were to start commenting on this page, they would block those comments because clearly they don't have a vested interest in affordable housing in Westboro. Additionally, there are community guidelines here, and they will halt any post that doesn't follow the community guidelines.
okay.
So I should have clarified that. We get notified if there's a question for us to answer after the moderator has just validated the identity and the community guidelines adherence to sort of keep that from getting out of hand.
Okay, thank you.
So, and then our job is to, answer questions and share facts and, acknowledge opinions. Some of the information that we know it's important to share is going to be in the frequently asked questions section, and then we may highlight some of those on the homepage in the image scroll as well.
Okay.
So for example, there's a misperception that how affordable housing lowers property values, and it actually doesn't. It actually supports property values. And most people don't realize that when you have an affordable rental unit, the landlord still gets the same rent as if they were renting at a market rate. The difference is some comes from the tenant, some comes from the state.
Really?
Really.
I didn't know that.
So we've actually had in Westboro, we've been fortunate that we've had landlords who've had affordable units that were under contract for a certain number of years.
Mhm.
That have decided to make those permanent affordable units because they've had, long-term, stable residents who pay their portion and the state pays its portion. So they're not, the landlord, it's a good investment for them to have affordable units in. And if the units became market rate, they'd lose good tenants. And so, it works well. It can, it really does work well for landlords as well as the tenants as well as the community. And so we want to sort of highlight some of these points so that people understand that, there's not a reason to be afraid,
Does this fall under Section 8 or something different?
That is standard subsidized housing in Massachusetts. It's not Section 8.
Okay.
So Section 8, just for clarification, is a federal program. The local boards and even the DHCD aren't involved in that program. Section 8 is a contract between the landlord and the federal government to accept the vouchers. And typically that can be a result of federal funds for development or renovation, things of that nature, or you have building owners who want to market to and are, given their location, want to have families be able to afford to live there. And if you're building a development and you're worried about renting all your units, participating in an affordable housing program is a way where you get full payment, just some from the rent, some from the tenant, some from the government, but you fill those units.
Alan, I think that even expanding upon this, like in a subsection, for landlords, this is great information that I don't think a lot of landlords know about.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Because I think that there is a stigmatism that goes along with it, that affordable housing is going to mean a different kind of tenant, and that there's a stereotype that goes along with that.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And we certainly want to break those misperceptions. Okay. So we're about 8:30. Any other questions or comments? So what I'll do after the meeting today is I'll send out an email with a link to the preview site, so people can start walking through it. Feel free to send, to reply back with any suggestions or any notes you have, any content you think we might want to add. Our focus for the site is to educate and build support so that when we get to the floor of annual town meeting, we've got an informed, an educated, and engaged electorate, and I should say, legislature. Okay, so if there's nothing else, let me stop the presenting. Okay, and so Amy, I'm wondering if the community engagement team was able to meet since our get together and chat since our last meeting.
So we, I'll own that. We had a little struggle, a little miscommunication about it. So we're trying to find a time to put everything together.
Okay. Okay. Keep me updated, and if you need any assistance with that, let me know. I can see what I can do to help.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm going to email you after.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay. So in adding this meeting to the agenda, Hank is still on vacation, and so in some emails back and forth with Hank last night, I'll double check with Steve, but Hank basically asked if we can go through the governance discussion at our meeting on next Friday. Steve, is that fine with you?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so then the next item on the agenda. We'll pass over the governance discussion and move to. Let me stop for a second because I forgot some things related. Well, we'll do it in next steps. We'll walk into the review of draft 4 of the analysis, recommendations, and actions report. And so I know Ed sent that out to everyone yesterday. I'm hoping folks had a chance to look at it and provide any feedback or questions. So Ed, do you want me to pull that up on my screen?
If you want, I just had a few points to make. Excuse me. I think that the first section, we've added an executive summary, or added back an executive summary. We've kept an introduction. The demographics we talked about, we've added a little bit more, particularly on age and what is called the Millennial Valley, which is where we see a dip in the 20 to sort of 34-year-old cohorts. So we talk about that a little bit more. So I've been working on that. A lot more work, though, in the past week has been done on housing affordability, particularly trying to show, as you saw in some of the slides from Convergence, the both cost burdens and costs of both renters and owners. So been working on that. We're in pretty good shape, I think, in getting that information together. I'm hoping to, on both 3 and 4, really have that done, except for maybe some formatting and, reviews and editing by next Friday, so that we can close them out to as much as possible. And then on the municipal, the trust fund, haven't really done anything with that. I think we agreed that we'd wait for what Hank and Steve would come in with as a, and then paste that in. It's easy enough to just take their document and put that in. Now, we did move and Alan, I want to make sure I got this right. There were 2 sections that had been in the section, what is now section 5 on the Affordable Housing Trust, which was the oversight and limitations and funding and financial management.
Right.
As I understood our conference yesterday, you wanted that moved into section, the last section, the recommendations.
Correct. So
okay, so I just cut and pasted in. So
right. So for the benefit of everyone, in my feedback to Ed was that section 5, which really defines what an affordable, a municipal affordable housing trust is, we would introduce that. We would provide sort of the summary of powers and the summary of the structure of the trust. But when we get into the specifics of what we're recommending for our trust as far as oversight and financial management goes, that would be part of our recommendations and move to the recommendation section. So rather than, we could provide an overview of the range of financial management and oversight and some discussion around it here. We can go back and put that in. But the initial draft from Hank was more his recommendations for how our trust specifically will be written. And so I felt that that content was best to move into the recommendations.
Right. And then what we decided, although it hasn't been reflected in the appendix yet, is instead of quoting the chapter 44, section 55C, is we're just going to start putting links in there. Really what Appendix A is going to be, it's links to sources and other documents or laws, et cetera. So it'll be a way where people can click through if they have a digital version of it that allows them to dig into the detail if they want. So yeah, you can see Appendix A there. One of the questions I would have, Alan, is would we plan on including the actual wording of the trust document that we're going to obviously need in place for town meeting?
Okay, let me stop presenting for a second. So for Mass Housing Partnership, their best practices are one of two recommendations as far as approaching town meeting. One is to have a warrant article that includes the actual declaration of trust in the wording. The other is to have a warrant article that refers to the declaration of trust, having a copy of it on file available for open inspection as a public record, but not including it in the actual warrant article itself. Most trusts, when they go before town meeting for creation, use the second method.
Right.
And the reason being is that the wording of the declaration of trust, well, it mirrors, first of all, it mirrors Mass General Law and the structure of Section 55 almost verbatim in some spots. It is a legal document that has certain wording and phrasing and structure that's required for a declaration of trust on a land trust in Massachusetts. And again, it's something that we will talk to and present as far as the scope of powers, as far as oversight, as far as management, staffing, things of that nature, at a summary at an English level as opposed to a legalese level when we make the presentation. So their recommendation is that most trusts find it easier for approval to have the warrant article to accept the section of Mass General Law into our bylaws for the town, referencing that we'll file the declaration of trust, once it's approved. That said, we definitely should have a declaration of trust drafted in what we believe is a final version ready for submission prior to town meeting that people can look at.
I guess the question is whether we take that and that becomes part of this document, which would once again be available both probably in Convergence itself as a link, also under the town website on our affordable housing page, et cetera, or whether it's just a separate document that we reference that's on file with the town clerk for review.
I would not put it in this document, but we'll definitely post it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
sure.
we're not hiding it from anyone. We want people to be able to read it if they're interested in reading it and working through the whereas and theretofores, of the legalese. That's cool. Right. But I don't know if I wouldn't put it verbatim into this document.
Okay.
We'd let people know where it's available for review.
Okay, and about how long is that normally? About how many pages? Do you know?
3 to 5.
Okay, it's not real big.
Well. Okay. So.
So that's where we are on the sort of the document. I think we're in pretty good shape. I mean, we had set the end of this month as sort of a target to get most things done. Obviously, Alan, we had talked yesterday about if there's some wording you can do on the recommendations and action plan, particularly mission, guiding principles. Okay,
and actually, I took a stab at that and thought, given that we have the time this morning, not that we have to stay till 9:30, but given that we have some time with the governance discussion moving to next week, what I'd like to do is I'll pull up. I've pulled some. I looked at the mission statements for a number of trusts and wrote something. They all tend to be very high level, somewhat generic, but also based on our conversations and looking back at, you know, my notes from our meetings as well as the Affordable Housing Forum, what I'd like to do is sort of talk about some guiding principles. And let me actually, okay. Can people see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's readable. Excellent. So is a draft mission statement. Again, this is common across housing trusts and mission statements. The mission of the Westboro Affordable Housing Trust is to provide for the creation and preservation of affordable housing in Westboro for the benefit of low and moderate income households. That's pretty boilerplate. Some mission statements go on with a second sentence saying, you know, we intend to do this by, and listing specific types of projects or specific actions that you initially think you're going to take. Some trusts like having that additional level of detail in the mission statement. Others don't because they feel it limits them into what they might do over time. So that, you know, they might say, you know, we're gonna accomplish this by, you know, buying properties and converting them to affordable. But then, you know, 3 years later, an opportunity comes up to build something new that's appropriate in their community, and they get feedback saying, wait a minute, that's not part of your mission, right? So it's a balance there, and I'm open to, you know, obviously any discussion in you know, on that and what people think of this mission statement, of other things they might want to add. A few housing trusts have commentary about, you know, the benefits to the community overall, and how the work of the trust ties in to, you know, affordability, quality of life, community development, things of that nature. I just didn't find any wording that sort of rang or sounded awesome to throw in here as template for people to consider, but I don't know. I'd like to hear everyone's thoughts on that. You know, is this fine? Is it too generic? Do we want to add additional elements to the mission statement? This is when I need the recording of the crickets.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go. I think brevity is good. I like keeping things more open than locking ourselves down to, you know, too much or trying to box in what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay.
I mean, the convergence, we may be able to get, we might get some feedback from there that might help us tune this up.
Okay. Okay. Steve or Amy or Leah, John?
Yeah, I like the brevity of the statement. I think it absolutely does what needed to be done, and therefore, you know, why add more words if it does what it needs to do?
Yeah, I agree. I like the brevity, as everyone said. I'm struggling because I feel like there should be some more all-inclusive language, but I can't think of what it would be.
Okay. So what do you mean by all-inclusive?
You know, benefit of low and moderate income households. I mean, yes, that's who it directly benefits, but I feel like there should be some statement about how affordable housing benefits the town in general, but I don't know how to say that in this context.
You're on mute, Amy.
Okay. She has the where's the red button look on her face.
Thank you. You're right. I do. The dogs are barking this morning. You got to keep everything on mute. But I do agree that it should be more encompassing, because right now it does only look like it's going to benefit people for low and moderate income households. So like we were just talking about how this has a benefit to landlords as well. And I think we'd appeal to more people and maybe get less resistance if we're encompassing everybody in this mission statement.
Okay. I guess I'm hesitant to try and list every stakeholder who would benefit directly or indirectly. That that
Yep.
list will get long. So what I'll do is, for now, I'll put something like in our community in general, and we can noodle around other words. So if people have suggestions.
Our community as a whole, I don't know.
I was thinking more, thinking out loud now, is something like, and creating a more affordable community. Because like affordable housing will create more affordability across the board, you think. So
Something along the lines here. Let me actually. So you're saying something along the lines of, we might say, to provide for the creation and preservation of affordable housing, to improve housing affordability. We need some other words in there, that broaden it, right? That would encompass workforce housing. That would encompass,
right.
Okay. And then, and then have in our community in general. Okay.
I don't know if you're saying things like that. Do you need low and moderate income households, or is that sort of implied by the housing affordability, the concept of housing affordability? We could say something affordable, the mission, affordable and preservation, or rather, to provide for creation and preservation.
So my concern,
to improve housing affordability in Westboro. And
my concern is making it too broad is 15 years down the road, when people aren't knowledgeable about this conversation right here, they're going to say, well, what did they mean by this general statement of affordability? And I don't want the trust to get too far away from actually providing affordable housing for low and moderate income households. If down the road there's some funding that comes available and somebody can interpret affordable housing as not actually affordable housing.
Right. No, I hear what you're saying, John, because affordable housing is the challenge is it's the term at the conceptual level, but it has a legal definition, right? That when most people think about the legal definition of affordable housing in Massachusetts, it's affordable. It's affordable saying that if you're at 80% of AMI, then your total cost of housing is not exceeding 30% of your gross income, right? And so that's the legal definition of where SHI fits in as sort of the state's definition of what's affordable, whereas housing affordability can be housing and programs that apply to folks up to 120, 130, even 135% of AMI, which, you're talking about for a family of four, income, gross income over $100,000 a year. So it's not just, it's a fairly broad range that you can get into. So I think you're right that we keep, with affordable housing, we keep the reference to low and moderate income households. Maybe we can play with the word, the words over the course of the week, but, to improve, housing affordability for, across the community, or across, come up with some phrasing that, relates to, workforce housing, housing for seniors that doesn't fall into the, the more narrow category of SHI. and to benefit the community in general. So if folks want to noodle on this and send me suggestions, we can bring this back next week and finalize it. Okay. So the next thing Ed asked me to do was some guiding principles. And again, I sort of went back and looked at my notes and comments from the Affordable Housing Forum back in January, the minutes and discussions from our meetings, other conversations, and this is an initial set of guiding principles I sort of pulled from that. We can delete, we can add, we can re-edit. So this is here right now as just food for thought. First would be help Westboro maintain the necessary, its necessary subsidized housing inventory. I phrased it that way because right now that threshold is 10%. Long term, that may stay 10%, it may not. But I think the community will want us to say that part of our goal and guiding principle is to keep us above the current 10% threshold or whatever that threshold might be, to avoid the hostile 40B developments that we can't control. I feel as a guiding principle, we should prioritize our work based on housing needs that come from data analysis as well as community input. So clearly we want to reflect the desires of the community, but we shouldn't ignore the data as far as in some places those will overlap, in some places those will be different. The data analysis is as far as what we might need for housing affordability in the broader sense of the term. So for example, Ed pointed out that our current age demographics has a millennial valley, right? So we're missing people in their 20s right now. And you say, well, why would that be an important thing to try and attract people in the 20s? Well, they shop local, they generally don't have kids in the schools, they dine out locally, they're going to have jobs in the area, so it shortens commutes and reduces road congestion. And so it's having that demographic, more of that demographic would be a benefit economically to the town, right?
Is it also possible that the 20-something-year-olds have so much in school debt that they've moved home and they're just not in this, they're not looking for housing because they're living at home in mom's basement?
That is definitely a possibility, and I'm not sure how we figure that out from the numbers yet.
Okay.
It's interesting because I think the 2020 census, when they actually, if they complete collecting the data, when it's collected and published, we might, some of the questions on there would lead me to believe that we could potentially get data from the Census Bureau that talks about adults who've, above the age of 18 who are living at home, and get a sense of that, or above the age of 21 or 22 living at home.
Yeah.
Next guiding principle would be promote efforts that span the full range of affordable and workforce housing needs and programs. This is letting people know that we're looking at SHI, but we're not limited to SHI projects, that we want to, this broader benefit for the community from housing, affordability, and economic development. That we should leverage projects that help the sustainability of the trust. I'm not saying to prioritize those. We've talked a little bit about, if we buy a property, convert it, and it gets sold or leased off as affordable housing, the trust has spent money that is gone, and that's fine. The trust can do that. However, if we do something where we partner with a private development and we use loans to help that project move forward, then the funds come back into the trust and can be used, for future projects as well. So certainly when that opportunity arises where we can lend versus spend, we should consider that. We should always consider and respect the impact of projects on town services. We often talk about, don't add housing that adds children to the schools, because people are very aware of that cost and the impact on town services. Yet other types of housing will create demand for other town services as well. And so any housing development, even the repositioning of current housing stock, will have an impact on town services to varying degrees. So we don't want to avoid projects because of the impact, but we should certainly consider that impact and respect the impact as we do our planning, so that we're respectful to the town and the taxpayer, things of that nature. And then there have been a number of comments about respecting the community and our history. I've reworded that to narrow the focus to really respect and reflect the architecture and styles of housing in our neighborhoods. And so this is saying, we're not going to want to go into a neighborhood of single family homes and put up a 20-unit apartment building that's 4 stories high, right? We wouldn't, in things of that nature. I want to avoid wording that even accidentally might give someone the impression that we're talking about any sort of socioeconomic, cultural, ethnic, or racial mix when we talk about preserving our community, and avoid any of those code words, because that's certainly not our intent. And so I've narrowed this principle to say that when we look at projects that we, in projects will be potentially in neighborhoods or can be anywhere in town, that we're not going to place a project that doesn't fit with the architectural and style character of that neighborhood. Now, a lot of that's managed through our zoning regulations that we have to adhere to, but I also think it's important because it helps break some of the myths about affordable housing. So, for example, there are affordable housing units in our town and others that from the outside look like a single-family home, right? There's only one visible entrance to the street, but when you walk in that entrance, it's actually a small foyer that has 2 or 3 entrances to different, apartments or multifamily units. And so you can put up affordable housing in different forms that still fit within the character and feel architecturally and style-wise in the neighborhood, and is respectful of the housing character of the neighborhood as well.
Alan, would that still be within existing zoning, or are there waivers for zoning to create something like that?
So anything we do would have to be within existing zoning regulations. And John, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. That's not to say that we couldn't take a project to the Zoning Board of Appeals if we wanted to do something that was non-conforming. If we're doing something on property that's municipally owned and it's M1 zoning, there are fewer restrictions on what we can do. And so, this guidance would say that, hey, yes, even though this property is zoned M1, and it's in a neighborhood where all the surrounding, are, R1 or I forget it. It's not R2. It's AB or AA or something. For 2-family housing that, we wouldn't go in and just because we could on that lot put up a 5-story apartment building. We wouldn't do that because it doesn't fit with the neighborhood and the style of housing there.
Thank you.
John, did I get that right about M1 versus other zoning?
I believe so. No, it would be interesting to see the interpretation of whether a municipally owned residential use would be considered a municipal use or a residential use.
Okay. Yeah.
Once you answer that question, once you answer that question, if it's a municipal use, then you can do anything. You can do anything that the town meeting allows you to do. You can make any presentation at the town meeting by virtue of what is on the documents that are reviewed by town meeting under M1. and do whatever you want. And the whole point of M1, since I wrote the first time out the door for town meeting's approval, whatever it was, 30 years ago, I guess. The purpose of why we created it at the time was that the then governor of Massachusetts wanted to put an amusement park on the state hospital.
I remember that.
And at that time, we had no protection against the state doing that. So by creating zoning for both state-owned land as well as municipal land, we gave the town meeting the right to set the zoning, and for whatever it was. And the whole point was that if the state then sold the land to a private developer, they no longer had the protection. The state allowed them to build whatever it was, and then folk backed out because they sold the property. Then the town would have had the amusement park by right as a grandfathered animal. So anyway, that's the reason why that all happened at the time. But basically the way it works is you go to town meeting with whatever you want to show, and as long as it's still owned by, quote, the municipal government, which maybe a housing authority would be considered that, you could do whatever you want. But of course, the town meeting has to approve it. And I think from the town father's point of view, if the town meeting approves it, then you don't have an issue of, whether it's acceptable or not to the community.
Right.
So, but on the other hand, I do think it's logical to say, hey, if we, the town, don't want to screw up a neighborhood, we certainly would want to offer something that would be as close to the local zoning of the surrounding neighborhood as possible. And I think that brings us back to, some of the things that I've espoused, which is to take existing housing stock, have the town acquire it, and turn it into affordable housing in that process, which then solves a couple of the things you guys already talked about, which is, one, have we increased the density in the neighborhood? Perhaps marginally, but we haven't changed the nature of the neighborhood. The idea that you mentioned, that the owner of the building isn't penalized for what the market rate rent could be is another amazing thing that I didn't know. And so, all things being equal, it's kind of a neat process to do all these things. So, so I guess it all would work out in the end. Whether we just go before the town meeting and say this is what we want to do with this parcel, and try to make it fit the process. And unless we invoke Chapter 40B rights, we wouldn't be going to the Zoning Board of Appeals, which basically eliminates town zoning in the process of you use 40B. Or alternatively, we just go and say, this is what we want to do, and try the best we can to fit into the local neighborhood zoning.
Okay.
So
Amy,
either of those two options would exist, I would think, for the town.
Yeah. Excuse me. I think the other issue that we had talked about and touched upon before is that even if we're able to identify some potential locations or whatever else, we run into the existing sewer moratorium and being able to tie in multifamily projects into the sewer.
That is true. My understanding is I can check with our town planner on this, that if a property currently has a tie-in or tie-in rights, that redevelopment of that property, those rights stay with the land. I'd have to see what the impact would be of a single, if you have tie-in rights and the zoning allows for the current zoning allows for two-family, then I believe you could convert from a single family to a two-family on that property under the current sewer rights, but I can confirm that and see where the limitations are.
Okay. I think that will just, even if there's an undeveloped piece of land or some such, then just being able to identify that to see if that's potential or if that's going to be a potential roadblock.
Yeah, and I know that there have been developments in town where when they subdivided the property, 1, 2, or 3 of the house lots had sewer rights, and the rest of the development ended up on
Septic.
on septic. Although I guess my understanding is real estate agents don't call it septic anymore. It's now private sewer because it sounds better.
I call it septic.
Okay. Because my house is private water, private sewer. We're out on the edge, on the country edge of town. Okay. So I guess what I'll ask with the guiding principles, have we missed anything? Are there any other guiding principles we want to include? Are people comfortable with these, with the wording of these? Well, I'll send these out the minutes and the attached documents, and if people have feedback, they can send that to me during the week, and we can update these and start including them in the document as well.
Alan?
Yep.
The only thing, can you go back? The only thing I'm wondering if on that first point, we should reference 40B just to make it clear that that's what we're talking about. Because when we say subsidized housing inventory, you could say, yeah, something like that, 40B. I think a lot of people know 40B term
Okay.
40B.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, definitely. And then one section we have in the document were priorities. These are not overly specific at this point. Again, we're looking to build consensus and support from the community and effectively our legislature to get approval. So the three priorities I've heard is affordable housing for seniors, specifically age 62 and over, availability and access to workforce housing, which and maybe we might want to expand on it. Provide housing so empty nesters can remain in. That's affordable for empty nesters. People who want to downsize and remain in town. We can come up with other bullet points like that without getting into the terminology of affordable housing per se, and then preserve existing affordable housing units. And this would be, generally housing trust funds can't be used for rehab of the unit or units. So, but that's not to say we can't do capital projects, right? So, sprinkler systems, putting sprinklers in Rogers Road and helping the housing authority do that. That's not considered rehab of a unit. That's infrastructure, and it's bringing it up to code, which is helping preserve it. Housing trusts have provided funding and loans to put new roofs on buildings, right? Again, you're not rehabbing a unit, but you're working on the infrastructure of the housing so that it can be remain active and on the market. So again, these are three quick bullet points. We can delete, we can add, we can edit. If people have initial comments now, great. If not, this will go out and we'll get feedback over the course of the week.
okay. I think not so much on this slide or this section. We do need to talk about what we mean by workforce housing in maybe the demographics section or the affordable housing section, one of those two sections, just so people know what that means. I can work on that, but I think that's important because it's not a term people throw around often.
Yeah, and so I think we should definitely define that in the affordable housing section in the document.
Yep.
As part of the education. There's no single definite, as I can find, there's no single definition right now of workforce housing.
I'll look around. Let me work on it.
Because when we talk, when everything about workforce housing is always in relationship to programs that are available. So there are programs designed to support workforce housing. So, Mass Housing, for example, has programs for workforce housing development that use 120% AMI. That workforce housing is housing affordable to people up to 120% of AMI, right? However, in partnership with Mass Housing, the state agency, the Massachusetts Housing Partnership and the City of Boston are running a program that's providing mortgage assistance and down payment assistance for first-time home buyers for workforce housing, and their threshold is 135% of AMI, right? So I think workforce housing is a range, and it really depends on how the program is defined. And so, for us on the Co-Urbanize site, I pulled a definition that was 130% of AMI. So I'll work with you, Ed, on helping come up with what a definition is. And maybe it's workforce housing is housing affordable of people up to, affordable to families up to 120 to 135% of AMI. It sort of depends on the nature of the program. So but you're right, that should definitely be added in.
And we could talk about, this may help, particularly with people, starting their careers or starting out, working. They don't have a lot of money now, but we want to provide something for them in town. We want to look for either programs and or physical housing to help them. But we'll finagle that and to make sure people understand when we say workforce, and by example.
Excellent. I agree. Okay. Any other final comments on this content or this discussion? Okay. If not, we're a little ahead of schedule, sort of move to other business next steps and action items. So a couple of other business items. We've talked about that Westboro is undergoing a master planning initiative. It's something that's done, every 5 to 20 years. It's actively, I think, as people have settled into the current COVID-19 related routines, the level of activity on that effort is starting to pick up again. And so I've been invited to liaison with and attend the housing subcommittee meeting on Monday afternoon. And so really have a discussion about how our efforts can support their efforts and vice versa, and what type of cooperation we might be looking at to help further the housing component of the master plan, as well as bring the master planning effort in to guide what we're doing here, both in the short term and once the trust is established. So that is happening. We will be, I'm not sure of the timing yet, but we will be invited back to another session of Frank and Mary in Westboro. And I'd like someone else to volunteer to go on either instead of me or with me or whatever, or a couple of folks to go on and have maybe a panel discussion, something along those lines. So think about if that's something to, if you're willing to do. It's actually, I won't joke about the viewership because that show actually has really good viewership. And so it's definitely a good way to get our word out a little bit. For action items.
Alan, just before you go on, that meeting on Monday, is that going to be broadcast, do you know? Or Aiden, do you know?
John, you extended the invite. I don't think it's broadcast because there's not a quorum of the subcommittee.
Okay.
So it's not going to be broadcast
All right.
because it's a subcommittee. It's not the master plan committee, but the Zoom meeting is going to be open to the public if they want to join.
Could we get? I might be interested. Could we? Is that going to be publicized somewhere?
It should be on the agenda, but I can pull up the information right now and put it in the chat.
Okay. And so while John's pulling that up, so next steps, continued feedback to Ed on the document. Any additional feedback to Hank and Steve on the governance component, and any feedback to Ed and myself on mission, principles, and priorities is appreciated over the next few days, so we can start bringing some of this to a closure. The other thing, as far as Co-Urbanize, I'd like to start the soft launch as soon as possible, and so it would be helpful if everyone on the committee could think about who in the community would be seen as a thought leader or an influencer. As I've thought about it, certainly, we'll send the preview link for the soft launch to get initial feedback, from the Board of Selectmen. It would be good to have, some folks from the Senior Center and Youth and Family Services who are involved in those committees participate. Maybe some, a few of the board members from Westboro Connects. The question is, who else do you know or think would be good to be, someone who'd go in, look at the materials, take a few minutes to understand it, and spend a little time answering those initial 5 questions.
I think planning board.
Okay. Okay. And then and so don't have to shout out names now, but if people want to send me emails, I'm also thinking, sort of like community leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Any business leaders in the community that, the goal is that when we open it up to the public sometime next week, that people go in and they see that there's engagement already happening, so they're comfortable adding their thoughts and participating. And so if people can email me any names, we'll hit some folks on the master planning committee, but feel free to share those with me. Okay. Anything else for other business or?
You want to talk about town meeting?
Oh yes, thank you. Town meeting, and so 2 things about town meeting is I will get them out to the committee to review, but we have 3 draft warrant articles. That process sort of happens in cooperation with the town manager's office that are being looked at and drafted. Obviously, they all go through town council as well. One would be to accept the Mass General Law, which would create the trust and give the trustees the ability to file the declaration of trust with the Worcester County Register of Deeds and with the Massachusetts Land Court. The second relates to funding from the initial inclusionary zoning funding in the original special permit for the Del Webb Chauncey Lake project. As folks might remember, that the developer, as part of the inclusionary zoning agreement and a part of that special permit, will either construct 25 units of senior affordable housing somewhere else in town, or at 3 different milestones provide funding specifically for affordable senior housing. And so one of the warrant articles will be to direct that money not through any of the stabilization funds, but directly to the trust, so that we can use it. And that money would be bound to specific projects for senior affordable housing. The other warrant article is, you're aware that at June town meeting, the town created a stabilization fund to accept the mitigation funds from the Zoning Board of Appeals decision, the $9 million. Town meeting will vote for some of that money to come our way, but because you cannot put money into a stabilization fund in the fiscal year in which the fund is created, what that means is that we couldn't put money in the fund until July 1st. And so the initial payment of the $9 million went into the general fund and has fallen into certified free cash. And so the third warrant article will be to ask the town to transfer some or all of those funds, as they're clearly intended in part for affordable housing and senior affordable housing, to the housing trust. So I'll have drafts of those warrant articles. They're sort of in the drafting process. Once we've got what we believe is the first draft, I'll share those out. We can hopefully talk about those at our next meeting. As far as town meeting goes, the town charter does allow the Board of Selectmen to move town meeting. We've had an official request from the town clerk in that our town meeting, which is the third tentatively scheduled for by default for the third Tuesday, I believe, or the third Monday in October, that is in the middle of early voting for the presidential election. And because of that, on a Monday, the town clerk's office is staffing the polling place until 5 p.m. They then need to do the counts and secure the ballots and all the logistics. They would then need to get over to the high school to check everyone in time for a 6 p.m. start of town meeting. And the feeling of the town clerk is that it's logistically difficult, if not impossible, for her and her staff to be in two places at once. And so she has requested that town meeting either move prior to the commencement of early voting or following the November 3rd election. There was discussion at the Board of Selectmen meeting of an initial date for town meeting to start on November 9th, which I believe is the Monday following the November election day. So there's no decision yet. The town moderator is clearly involved in this discussion as well. And so there's a good chance it won't be the third Monday in October, but nothing has changed yet. My expectation is we'll end up in November. It's sort of, if you ask me as an individual, that's my guess. And we'll see how we get there. I'm not quite sure yet, but I think we'll get there. Okay, any other questions or issues? Okay, I'm open to a motion for adjournment. Amy, was that your motion?
That was my motion. Literal.
Okay, cool. Literal, excellent. And a second?
I'll second the said.
Okay, so roll call vote. Steve?
I move to adjourn as well, and I vote in favor.
Okay, so Steve says yes. Ed?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes. Excuse me.
And Alan Edinburgh says yes as well. So we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Westboro TV, for the live broadcast and helping us maintain the videos and the recordings. And thank you for members of the public who may be up early morning enjoying a cup of coffee and watching us, so live or watching the recording later on. Have a great day.